Well, Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla held talks with British Home Secretary Priti Patel in London, during which he strongly underlined India's interest in the expeditious extradition of former Kingfisher Airlines chief Vijay Mallya and fugitive diamond merchant Nirav Modi. On the last leg of his three-nation Europe tour, Shringla visited London, where he held discussions with several UK ministers and officials. Earlier, in the second leg of his tour, India sought to position itself as a reliable partner for Germany at a time when the Indo-Pacific region has begun to occupy an important place in Berlin's strategic outlook. Meanwhile, on his first non-neighborhood stop in pandemic-age diplomacy, Shringla conveyed India's solidarity with France and suggested that it was time to stop attributing attacks in Nice or the beheading of a teacher in France simply as lone wolf attacks or the work of misguided individuals. In this edition of India's World, we will analyze India-EU ties. Joining me on the program today are Garima Mohan, Fellow, German Marshall Fund, Mohan Kumar, former Ambassador, and Sheetal Sharma, Assistant Professor, Center for European Studies, JNU. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of India's World. Ambassador, let me begin the program with you first, and let's compartmentalize it and channelize the discussion as well as the three legs of the European tour. Let's start with France first. India, of course, stood by France and, stood by France very strongly after seeing the attacks, especially in Nice. And India also sent out strong messages, as far as radicalization is concerned and also against terrorism. What were the key takeaways for you as far as Shringla's visit to Paris was concerned?
So I see. Thank you very much for having me on the show. I see this as a continuation of India-EU virtual summit, which took place in July 2020. And for the Foreign Secretary's visit, this is the first visit he's making outside of the neighborhood in a physical fashion, virtual summits. So my guess would be, and this is only a guess because I'm no longer in the government, but when you make a physical trip like this, it is quite normal for the Foreign Secretary to be carrying messages from the Prime Minister to the President of France. So that is one thing that I would say straight away. I mean, it could be just thanking them for the Rafale. It could be the appreciation of the situation in the neighborhood. I'm not able to tell you the contents of the letter, but otherwise, you don't do a physical visit unless you feel the need to touch base with your strategic partners and convey messages that you cannot otherwise convey through meetings that we are just having now. So that's the first, I would say. The second, I would say, is obviously France has now emerged as a complete, strategic partner. If there is a comprehensive strategic partnership that we have, which rivals the United States, I would say, frankly, because in some areas I find in the Security Council, it is France which has taken the lead, whether it is blacklisting of terrorists, whether it is issues like, the multilateral disarmament regimes, the missile technology control regime, debate in the nuclear security group. France has stood by us through thick and thin. I think I've said this before on your program. One of the first things we are told when I went as ambassador to France is the fact that this country stood by us in 1998, when virtually the entire world declared us a pariah. So I think France as the first stop is logical. But for me, I think it's also a larger point I would make before you ask the other panelists for their opinion. I'm delighted about what is going to happen, hopefully, between US and Europe, because one of the things that I was worried about, and India is worried about, is that if you have only two poles, which is United States and China, then India's room for maneuver becomes less. So we need Europe as a pole. And that can happen only if there is a good transatlantic relationship. So I'm hoping, Harsh Shringla, Foreign Secretary, may not have been able to discuss it because at that time it was not evident that Joe Biden may be on the brink of victory, but we need Europe as a pole. And I think discussions would have ranged definitely on China. And we will talk a little bit later on in the program because I'm excited about first France having an Indo-Pacific policy and now Germany joining the the ranks with an Indo-Pacific policy. So it will be interesting to see how Europe can play a role in this region as well. So all in all, France being the first stop makes sense because UK is now no longer part of EU. And in the EU, it is now only one country which has strategic deterrence, nuclear weapons, and membership of the Security Council. And that's
Absolutely.
only France. So it makes sense that you make Paris your first stop. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we'll broaden the scope of the discussion and talk about Europe as a whole and talk about not just France, Germany, and UK, but the other EU countries as well. But looking at the silo once again, let's focus a little bit on UK, Sheetal Sharma. And post-Brexit, of course, UK is looking for partnership, strong partnership, and certainly looking towards India. And the UK leg of the visit too was fruitful.
Frank, I would put it first on the global map and then we'll focus on UK. Now, when we talk about the global engagement, India has been engaging with a number of countries and regions at a multilateral level and a bilateral level as well. Now, bilaterals with all these three countries, particularly in Europe, has been very good, robust in the sense and multidimensional in and covering various aspects of it. Now, if you look at Europe and all the newspapers which were covering this particular visit by the Foreign Secretary, they said India connecting or India engaging with the old Europe. Now, old Europe has got two connotations. One is Europe in the aging sense and other one is Europe as an old power, if not dominant in the sense, but at least significant and important in various respects. Because number one, if we look at our engagement with the United States of America, which has been going continuously upward direction on the bilateral graph, that is good, engaging with Europe, engaging with US. Number two, if we look at China, how are we engaging China? There are two ways of engaging China, which we have been balancing very beautifully. Containment on one side by garnering support, by garnering support from rest of the world, and at the same time engagement. So we are balancing how we are managing China. Number three, if we look at our old allies, such as Russia, we have also been having a good kind of relationship with Russia, but at the same time, exercising our strategic autonomy. Number four is Europe. As Mohan sir was just out saying that we read another pole, and this is very important that we have another anchor in the world. And why Europe particularly and why these three nations? Because these are the most important countries in the entire conglomeration of the European Union and Europe in general. And Germany, France and UK, they tend to have quite a lot of weight in the scheme of things in the European Union. And why particularly UK? UK stands out important because of a couple of reasons. Number one, post-Brexit, UK is trying to reposition, redesign its political and economic engagements and the foreign policy aspects of its existence. Now, when it is realigning itself, repositioning itself, India has a very important role to play. The reason being, pre-COVID era, if you talk about pre-COVID era, Europe, particularly if we talk about UK, had a very different opinion about China. They thought that we are going to maintain good economic relationships with China, overlooking the kind of diplomacy China is engaging in. But over a period of time, the European Union, member states of the European Union have become wary of China. They have understood the Chinese form of diplomacy has been exposed. And they have become quite cautious of the fact that they have to distance themselves and at the same time balance how they manage China. So in that case, India has an opportunity in order to project itself. And if you look at the content of the three-nation visit and particularly UK as well, the trust factor has been the buzzword during the entire visit and discussions and diplomacy, what is happening. So India is going to garner support from all these three countries, greater level with European Union, and then at the bilateral level, particularly with UK, with all the important components of the traditional diplomacy, at the same time strategic issues which are at core.
Right. All right. So, Garima Mohan, let me bring you into the picture now, and let's talk about the German aspect now. And very clearly, of course, Germany is looking for new allies, looking for a new strategy, really, as far as the Indo-Pacific is concerned. That's something that the former ambassador also brought up, really. So where do India and Germany stand at this point in time?
Thank you, Frank, for having me on the show today. I think the German part of the visit, it's very important to see why Foreign Secretary chose these three countries to visit. And this is a crucial time for India to engage Germany particularly given that Germany is now looking at its own Indo-Pacific strategy and is really understood that it needs to diversify its partnerships in Asia. I have to say that the EU-India summit showed that both sides have rediscovered each other as important partners. And this debate is particularly evident in Germany, which is not only trying to sort of find its way in the world given US-China competition, but there's an increasing disillusionment with China, which has come to a head with the coronavirus crisis, but had been going on for a long time. You were seeing this message come out of the German business lobby, from German politicians, from the policy world in general, disillusionment with China, and really trying to understand that we need to diversify our partnerships in Asia. And it is in this context that they see India. So I think it was very crucial for India to engage Germany at this point, not stay on the sidelines, be front and center as Germany is trying to, in a way, rediscover its Asia policy. It had put all its eggs in the China basket, and now it's trying to understand how to engage with other partners. So it was a very well-timed and crucial visit. And I hope this momentum continues, because it's not just Germany that is looking for a national Indo-Pacific strategy. It also said that it will, with the support of other European member states, including the Netherlands, push for the EU as a whole to adopt something. Now, I think if the EU becomes a partner in the region as well, this will take India-EU partnership to the next level. So I think the possibilities and the potential we're just starting to see, and it's only going to increase in the coming few years.
Absolutely. All right. So, Ambassador, let me bring you in again, and let's broaden the scope of the discussion and talk about the Indo-Pacific as well, because France has got a solid hold in the Indo-Pacific, and also, a lot of interest really as far as the Indian Ocean is concerned. So how can India and France really take that relationship up a notch? We've seen that, we've strengthened the Quad as well with the Malabar exercise and with Australia joining in. So can France be brought on board as well at some point in time and have several like-minded countries coming together in the Indo-Pacific?
So it's interesting you ask this question about France. You've got the larger Indo-Pacific concept, which I think focuses not so much on the security aspect, but on keeping the sea lanes of communication, conformity to a rules-based order, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea and all that. But to give, shall I say, substance and ballast to Indo-Pacific, what I am now seeing is a series of concentric circles, and I draw attention to the Foreign Secretary's speech in London. It's a very good speech, which has also been published today in Indian Express. He talks of concentric circles. We are, as you know, in India, we never get rid of mandalas because of our interest in Kautilya and so on. But anyway, these concentric circles make a lot of sense to me. What you are seeing is you've got the Quad, which probably occupies center stage, not least because the United States is involved, and India, Japan, Australia, and we are also the earliest members of that. But then you are seeing a number of other trilaterals. And France, Australia, India have already had a trilateral. So I think France has been, to some extent, it has been drawn into the Indo-Pacific strategy, or I wouldn't say Quad, but certainly we use the trilateral as a way of going forward. What is often forgotten is that France has a lot of real estate in the Indian Ocean. I mean, I had an opportunity to visit Reunion Islands. It's amazing. It's very strange. The ambassador in Paris, the embassy in Paris, it's got only one consulate, and the consulate is not in Bordeaux or it's not in Lyon, but it's up there in Reunion, which is about 8 hours away. So if I have to go from Paris to Reunion, it takes me 8 hours. I might as well come back to India and then go. So it's very far, but still Reunion is very much France. It's what the French describe as overseas territory. And Reunion Islands is an excellent vantage point to observe what is happening in the Indian Ocean, especially in that area. And I want to make this point that France, to some extent, fills the definitional gap between India and the United States. We have a definitional gap in Indo-Pacific. And I was happy to note the German policy paper, which actually says entire Indian Ocean, entire Pacific Ocean. a typical German clarity, if you like. These guys don't leave anything to chance. Simple, straightforward, entire Indian Ocean, entire Pacific Ocean. The Americans don't believe that because they really say Hollywood to Bollywood kind of definition, So for us, the French definition makes a lot of sense because we want things west of India as well. You've got the Gulf, you've got Africa. So I do believe getting France on board has been excellent. Germany has now, I think, as we said, and as Ms. Garima Mohan pointed out, they've announced their policy. I think the German announcement has to be interpreted. It's a very significant announcement in my view, because in the weakest link in EU's policy towards China for me so far, hitherto, has been Germany. Because obviously 50% of EU exports to China are German. So you can't really blame them for it. For Germany now to have put out this policy statement, which, by the way, attracted attention, and the Global Times, the trouble with Global Times, you don't know how much it is for effect and how much the Chinese really mean it. But they have said that we find it unfortunate that Germany has done this and so on. But it is actually a very, very polite and a very harmless statement in one way. The German statement doesn't talk of confrontation with China or anything like that. The fact that Germany has chosen to endorse Indo-Pacific itself is seen as a big thing. Because the Indo-Pacific strategy, whether you like it or not, is perceived as having or as being aimed at countering or containing China. That's the issue, really. So on the whole, I would say we are in for interesting times. And again, going back to the German statement, they say the future of the rules-based international order will be decided in Indo-Pacific. I find it extraordinary that the Germans are saying that, frankly, because it shows you the worldview sitting in Europe. And for me, we should take advantage. Ms. Garima Mohan is right. We should take advantage of this opportunity. I'm talking of India, of course. We shouldn't let the opportunity slip. And we should reinforce these tendencies that we are seeing in Europe. And now with a change of president in the United States, we may also find that the environment is right for these things. So it's interesting. Thank you. Absolutely.
All right. So Sheetal Sharma, since we're talking about China and we're bringing in the Chinese aspect into the picture, and like Garima pointed out, that Europe is looking to diversify, more so Germany at this point in time. But can Europe actually do that, move away from China? And can India be the answer to what the European nations are looking for?
Frank, you are right to a certain extent, but it will take some time. The kind of interlinkages and interdependence which has happened in the last 2 decades particularly, it will take some time. However, there are some interesting points to be raised here when we talk about EU and its engagement with China. Number one, EU is itself divided over, there are differences over a couple of things, such as economic differences. Number 2, differences over migration policies. Number 3, China. Now, Eastern European countries, they were much, pro-China pre-COVID era, or in fact, for some of the years, because large amount of transactions and the business was happening with East European countries. Although, of course, the Western Europeans were also dependent upon and had robust economic relationships with China. But then there were certain issues on which they disassociated themselves, totally aligning with China. The thing was that although they were driving the same cars, they were using the same things, markets were flooded with Chinese products, but they understood that there is a difference in the values and the principles that are governing China and the Western European countries. Over a period of time, with China exposing its insidious ideas and the intentions, even the East European countries have become very cautious of how China is going to move in future. Now, India has an opportunity to develop this EU+1 kind of a partnership where it can actually, if not replace China, but at least take over some of the roles which China had been doing. How are you thinking about that? How do you do it? Now, one important thing is that in the COVID era, particularly, the Chinese soft power is at its lowest. It was always not there among the first 30s or 40s. But now the trust factor, the soft power equation, it has nosedived to a large extent. And China has lost the trust which had, which was there existing in the minds of the European Union member states. So one thing is that there is a kind of vacuum. All the economies are suffering because of COVID to large and lesser extent. Now, this is the time for India to step into and fill that vacuum. India is gradually disassociating itself. US is doing that. No matter what kind of leadership comes to US, and it has already come, the degree of strictness may vary. However, they are going to continue to remain strict with China. Number three, that even the EU, all the member states of the EU, they somehow feel, and particularly if I talk about UK, that despite the fact that they might have thought that these two things would run parallelly, economic relationship on one side, and let's not worry about the values and the principles on the other side, but the whole Western world is going to reflect that there is some kind of convergence towards this Atlantic ideas rather than something which is Chinese in nature or something which China is being assertive, hegemonic in the region. And India sees a very good scope for convergence. We already are converging on so many ideas of democracy, freedom of expression, and all these things. So we have a good opportunity to step into the kind of space that has been created because of some of the actions which China has taken and some of the fallouts of COVID era. So it's an opportunity for us.
Absolutely. All right. So Garima Mohan, let's not forget that Europe is not just France, UK and Germany. There are several other countries too that we need to focus on and that we need to really take forward in the near future as well. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And we saw last week on Friday, Prime Minister Modi and the Italian Prime Minister Conte had a summit as well. Absolutely, I think in the European member states as well as the EU have an important part to play, both in India's domestic growth story and building a domestic resilience, which frankly we need if we want to achieve our global aims and also to deal with our neighbors. And they're also important partners when it comes to India's view of the world and shaping global debates. So I see this in three areas in terms of economic partnership and trade. EU member states as well as the EU will continue to be important. In terms of defense and security partnerships, now even with the summit with Italy, we talked about defense manufacturing. This is going to be an important part. European countries will continue to be important partners for India. And then what I was talking about, India's modernization and growth story, building infrastructure in India and regional connectivity infrastructure with our neighborhoods, dealing with climate-related challenges, smart cities, all of these things, which sort of, are left on the sidelines when we talk of Indian foreign policy, but are crucially important. And I think here, European member states and the EU will continue to play a big role. But I also want to talk about, our view of the world. And here, when we look at, the debate, global debate shaping around 5G, use of critical technologies on supply chains, right? Like after the coronavirus crisis, a question in the mind of all countries is supply chain resilience. Here as well, an Indo-Pacific role of China, role of the US, we have so much to talk about with European countries than we did in the past. So certainly, I think it's important for us to make sure that we have the key sort of strong European powers as well as the EU. We are engaging with both. I have to say, I was very surprised and pleasantly surprised to see in Foreign Secretary's speech in Paris to the think tank IFRI, he mentioned not just our relationship with France, but also with the EU. He also spoke about European sovereignty. And this is a very good signal to send because all through the coronavirus crisis, China has been sending signals which are undermining European unity. And we are sending a signal saying we understand the importance of Europe as a bloc. So I think in terms of our engagement, we are on the right track in engaging both the member states as well as the EU.
Absolutely. All right, Ambassador, let me now get a closing comment from you. I've got limited time on the program. So what's the best way forward as far as India and the EU are concerned?
Thank you very much. I would suggest a twin track approach where we separate the strategic defense Indo-Pacific security matters on one basket, where I think we may have to pick individual countries because the European Union is still too large a disparate structure which doesn't have a security, is as a security policy, but it doesn't have, shall we say, the beef to back it up. So on those, I see a conversation with France, Germany, Italy, etc. But on the larger relationship with EU, for me, there are three focus areas. One is climate change. where I think the best technology and practices are still available only with the EU. That's one. Second, in the area of e-commerce and digitalization, I would like to see a greater convergence between EU and India on privacy, where I think we have positions which are reasonably common. We need to do this because we are getting into trouble with other countries. Even with US and Japan, we're not on the same wavelength on the Osaka track. So we need EU on our side, or rather, we should be cooperating much more with EU on this issue. And last but not least, my familiar, shall we say, my favorite pet topic is, I think we missed the bus on this FTA. But now that they have announced a ministerial dialogue on trade and investment, we need to really buck up. I think there is more action to be done on the Indian front.
Right.
I think at the highest level, they have agreed it's got to be balanced, ambitious, and mutually beneficial, obviously. But you'll have to break it down, really, these three expressions, and try and see how we can very quickly try and do a deal before it's too late. Thank you.
Okay, on that note, then I'll call it a wrap on this edition of India's World. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting